Question 1. The analysis reveals that Officer Miller, while on routine patrol in El Paso, Texas, observes a pedestrian discard a small, unidentifiable object into a public trash receptacle. The pedestrian immediately continues walking, and when briefly questioned by Officer Miller, denies discarding anything of significance. Officer Miller has a brief moment to decide on the next course of action. Which of the following represents the most appropriate professional response for Officer Miller? Option A. Immediately confront the pedestrian with an accusation of attempting to conceal evidence, demanding an explanation for the discarded item. Option B. Secure the discarded object from the trash receptacle as potential evidence, document the observation and the retrieval, and proceed with the investigation based on departmental procedures. Option C. Dismiss the discarded object as irrelevant based on the pedestrian's denial and continue the patrol, assuming no further action is necessary. Option D. Discreetly dispose of the discarded object from the trash receptacle, deeming it unlikely to be of any investigative value without further examination. The correct answer is B. Secure the discarded object from the trash receptacle as potential evidence, document the observation and the retrieval, and proceed with the investigation based on departmental procedures. Explanation. The analysis reveals a scenario that is professionally challenging due to the inherent tension between departmental policy, the need for thorough investigation, and the potential for public perception to influence outcomes. Officer Miller must exercise careful judgment to ensure adherence to established procedures, while also considering the broader implications of their actions. The correct approach involves meticulously documenting all observations and evidence, regardless of initial impressions, and submitting a comprehensive report that allows for objective review by supervisors. This is correct because it aligns with the El Paso Police Department's Standard Operating Procedures, SOP, regarding evidence handling and reporting, which mandate thoroughness and accuracy. Ethically, it upholds the principle of due process by ensuring all relevant information is presented for a fair assessment, preventing premature conclusions that could prejudice an investigation or an individual. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the discarded item as irrelevant based on a cursory glance and the suspect's immediate denial. This is professionally unacceptable because it bypasses the requirement for comprehensive evidence collection and documentation outlined in EPPD SOPs. It represents an ethical failure by potentially overlooking crucial evidence that could be vital to the investigation, thereby compromising the integrity of the process and the department's commitment to thoroughness. Another incorrect approach would be to immediately confront the suspect with an accusation based solely on the visual observation of the discarded item, without further investigation or corroboration. This is professionally unacceptable, as it violates the principle of presumption of innocence and the EPPD procedural guidelines for suspect interaction and evidence-based accusations. Ethically, it demonstrates a lack of impartiality and could lead to a wrongful accusation or the intimidation of an individual without sufficient grounds. A further incorrect approach would be to dispose of the discarded item without logging it as potential evidence, assuming it was insignificant. This is professionally unacceptable, as it directly contravenes EPPD SOPs on evidence preservation and chain of custody. It represents a significant ethical failure by deliberately or negligently omitting potential evidence, which could obstruct justice and undermine public trust in the department's investigative capabilities. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to departmental policy and legal mandates. This involves a systematic approach. First, observe and document all relevant details. Second, collect and preserve all potential evidence according to protocol. Third, analyze the collected information objectively. And finally, report findings accurately and completely to facilitate informed decision-making by supervisors and investigators. This structured process ensures accountability, fairness, and the integrity of law enforcement operations. Question 2. The audit findings indicate that a recent batch of seized narcotics was logged into the EPPD evidence system with a delay of 48 hours, and the officer who initially secured the evidence failed to record the specific location within the suspect's residence where it was found, noting only residence. What is the most appropriate course of action for the supervising officer to take in response to these audit findings? Option A. Immediately initiate a formal review of the evidence handling procedures for this specific case, documenting the discrepancies and ensuring all subsequent evidence transfers are meticulously logged with complete details, while also providing immediate retraining to the involved officer on EPPD evidence handling SOPs. Option B. File a minor disciplinary report for the procedural oversight and instruct the officer to verbally confirm the details of the seizure and transfer to a colleague for verification, without formal amendment of the existing log. Option C. Accept the explanation that the officer was overwhelmed with other urgent tasks and instruct the officer to amend the existing log with the missing location details, assuming the evidence integrity is otherwise intact. Option D. Advise the officer to create a new, corrected evidence log entry that supersedes the original, omitting any mention of the initial delay or incomplete information to streamline the case file. The correct answer is A. Immediately initiate a formal review of the evidence handling procedures for this specific case, documenting the discrepancies and ensuring all subsequent evidence transfers are meticulously logged with complete details, while also providing immediate retraining to the involved officer on EPPD evidence handling SOPs. Explanation: the audit findings indicate a potential lapse in adherence to El Paso Police Department EPPD policies regarding the proper handling and documentation of seized evidence. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need to process evidence with the absolute necessity of maintaining an unimpeachable chain of custody. Any deviation can compromise investigations, lead to the suppression of evidence in court, and damage public trust in the department's integrity. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all procedural safeguards are met, even under pressure. The best professional approach involves meticulously following the EPPD-established Standard Operating Procedures, SOP, for evidence handling. This includes accurately logging all seized items, noting the exact time and date of seizure, the location of seizure, the officer involved, and a detailed description of the item. Crucially, it requires immediate and thorough documentation of the chain of custody, detailing every transfer of the evidence from the point of seizure to its final disposition. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the EPPD internal regulations designed to preserve the integrity of evidence, which is a fundamental requirement for successful prosecution and adherence to due process. It ensures that the evidence is admissible in court and protects officers from accusations of misconduct or negligence. An incorrect approach would be to prioritize the speed of processing over complete and accurate documentation. For instance, delaying the logging of a seized item or omitting details about its condition at the time of seizure, with the intention of completing it later, violates EPPD SOPs. This failure to document contemporaneously creates gaps in the chain of custody, making the evidence vulnerable to challenges regarding its integrity and potentially rendering it inadmissible. Another incorrect approach is to rely on informal notes or verbal agreements for evidence transfer, rather than utilizing the official EPPD evidence logs and transfer forms. This bypasses the established accountability mechanisms and significantly increases the risk of evidence being lost, tampered with, or misidentified, thereby undermining the investigative process and the department's credibility. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes procedural adherence and meticulous documentation. This involves understanding the critical importance of the chain of custody, as mandated by EPPD policy and legal precedent. When faced with time constraints, the professional approach is to allocate sufficient time for proper documentation or to seek assistance to ensure that all steps are completed accurately and in real time. This proactive approach prevents potential issues down the line and upholds the highest standards of professional conduct and legal compliance. Question 3. Implementation of a new policy within the El Paso Police Department, EPPD, mandates a specific protocol for responding to citizen complaints alleging excessive force by officers. Following a recent incident, a citizen filed a formal complaint against an EPPD officer, alleging that the officer used unnecessary force during a traffic stop. The officer, when initially questioned by a supervisor, stated that their actions were justified and in accordance with training. What is the most appropriate and professionally responsible course of action for the EPPD to take in this situation, adhering to the principles of accountability and due process as outlined in the new policy? Option A. Arrange for an informal meeting between the complainant and the officer to attempt a resolution without any formal documentation or adherence to departmental investigation protocols. Option B. Initiate a formal, impartial investigation into the complaint, gathering all available evidence including witness statements, dashcam footage, and any relevant documentation, and review the incident against EPPD policies and procedures regarding use of force. Option C. Dismiss the complaint immediately based on the officer's verbal assertion of justification, assuming their training and experience would have guided them appropriately. Option D. Proceed with disciplinary action against the officer based solely on the complainant's statement, without conducting a thorough investigation to corroborate the allegations. The correct answer is B. Initiate a formal, impartial investigation into the complaint, gathering all available evidence including witness statements, dashcam footage, and any relevant documentation, and review the incident against EPPD policies and procedures regarding use of force. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between maintaining public trust and the need for efficient law enforcement operations. Officers are entrusted with significant authority, and their actions, even when seemingly minor, can have a profound impact on community relations and the perception of the El Paso Police Department (EPPD). The decision-making process must balance operational needs with adherence to departmental policy and ethical conduct, ensuring that all actions are justifiable and transparent. The best approach involves a thorough, policy-driven investigation that prioritizes factual accuracy and due process. This means meticulously gathering all available evidence, including witness statements, dashcam footage, and any relevant documentation, to form a comprehensive understanding of the incident. The investigation should be conducted impartially, adhering strictly to EPPD policies and procedures regarding use of force and citizen complaints. This ensures that the review is objective, fair, and grounded in established departmental standards, thereby upholding the integrity of the EPPD and maintaining public confidence. An approach that dismisses the complaint without a formal investigation, based solely on the officer's verbal assertion of justification, fails to uphold due process and erodes public trust. It bypasses established procedures for handling citizen complaints, suggesting a lack of accountability and potentially overlooking valid concerns. This can lead to a perception that the EPPD is not committed to fair and thorough investigations, damaging its relationship with the community it serves. Another unacceptable approach is to immediately discipline the officer based on the complainant's statement alone, without conducting a thorough investigation. This demonstrates a failure to adhere to principles of fairness and due process, as it presumes guilt without adequate evidence. Such an action undermines the officer's rights and can create a hostile work environment, while also failing to establish a clear factual basis for disciplinary action, potentially leading to appeals and further complications. Finally, an approach that involves informal mediation between the complainant and the officer without any formal documentation or adherence to departmental policy is also professionally unsound. While informal resolution can sometimes be beneficial, it is inappropriate for serious allegations, especially those involving potential policy violations or use of force. This method lacks the rigor and accountability required for official investigation, leaving no clear record of findings or actions taken, and failing to address potential systemic issues within the department. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the specific policies and procedures governing the situation. This involves identifying the relevant departmental regulations, legal statutes, and ethical guidelines. Next, they should gather all pertinent facts and evidence objectively. Then, they must analyze the gathered information against the established framework to determine the most appropriate course of action. Finally, they should document their decision-making process and the rationale behind their chosen course of action, ensuring transparency and accountability. Question 4. To address the challenge of securing and documenting suspected illicit substances found during a traffic stop on Interstate 10 within El Paso city limits, what is the most appropriate immediate course of action for an El Paso Police Department officer to ensure the evidence's integrity and admissibility in court, adhering to Texas law and departmental policy? Option A. Immediately package, seal, and label the suspected substances according to EPPD evidence handling protocols, noting all relevant details of the seizure, and then proceed with other investigative tasks while ensuring the evidence is promptly transported to the evidence locker. Option B. Place the suspected substances in a temporary, unsecured container within the patrol vehicle and proceed with conducting witness interviews before formally logging the evidence. Option C. Secure the suspected substances in the patrol vehicle's trunk and wait for a supervisor to arrive and oversee the evidence logging process before any documentation begins. Option D. Rely on a verbal description of the seized items and their location to a fellow officer, with the understanding that formal documentation will occur at a later, unspecified time. The correct answer is A. Immediately package, seal, and label the suspected substances according to EPPD evidence handling protocols, noting all relevant details of the seizure, and then proceed with other investigative tasks while ensuring the evidence is promptly transported to the evidence locker. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for El Paso Police Department, EPPD, officers regarding the proper handling of evidence in a controlled substance investigation. The core difficulty lies in balancing the urgency of securing potentially volatile evidence with the strict procedural requirements mandated by Texas law and EPPD policy to ensure the admissibility of that evidence in court. Failure to adhere to these protocols can lead to the suppression of crucial evidence, jeopardizing the prosecution and undermining public trust in the department's integrity. Careful judgment is required to navigate the immediate operational needs with the long-term legal and ethical obligations. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately securing the suspected controlled substances in a manner that preserves their integrity and chain of custody, while simultaneously initiating the formal evidence logging process as per EPPD policy and Texas Code of Criminal Procedure. This approach prioritizes both the immediate safety and investigative needs and the long-term legal requirements for evidence admissibility. Specifically, officers must ensure the evidence is properly packaged, sealed, and documented from the moment of seizure, noting the exact time, location, and individuals involved. This aligns with Texas Code of Criminal Procedure Article 38(23), which emphasizes that evidence obtained in violation of the Constitution or laws of Texas or the United States is not admissible. By meticulously following EPPD-established evidence handling procedures, officers create a clear and unbroken chain of custody, which is vital for demonstrating the evidence's authenticity and integrity in court. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves delaying the formal logging of the seized substances until after the initial interviews are completed. This creates a significant gap in the chain of custody, raising questions about the evidence's whereabouts and potential for tampering during the interim period. Such a delay could be challenged under Texas Code of Criminal Procedure Article 38(23), as it deviates from established procedures designed to maintain evidence integrity from the point of seizure. Another incorrect approach is to store the suspected substances in an unsecured location within the patrol vehicle for an extended period, while awaiting transport to the evidence locker. This practice compromises the security and integrity of the evidence, making it vulnerable to contamination, loss, or unauthorized access. This directly violates EPPD internal policies on evidence security and could lead to the evidence being deemed inadmissible under the principles of chain of custody and due process. A third incorrect approach is to rely solely on verbal confirmation of the seizure and its details without immediate written documentation. While verbal communication is important, it is insufficient for establishing a legally defensible chain of custody. The absence of contemporaneous written records, including detailed descriptions, dates, times, and officer signatures, creates a significant vulnerability in the evidence's admissibility. Texas law, as reflected in evidentiary rules and case law, requires clear and verifiable documentation to prove that the evidence presented in court is the same evidence seized at the scene and has been continuously accounted for. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to established legal and departmental procedures. This involves 1. Recognizing the immediate need for evidence preservation and security. 2. Consulting and strictly following EPPD standard operating procedures for evidence handling and the Texas Code of Criminal Procedure. 3. Documenting all actions contemporaneously and meticulously. 4. Understanding that any deviation from established protocols, even if seemingly minor or for expediency, can have severe legal consequences for the case and the officer's professional standing. The ultimate goal is to ensure that all investigative actions are legally sound and ethically defensible, thereby upholding the integrity of the justice system. Question 5. Examination of the data shows that an El Paso Police Department officer, while investigating a reported disturbance, encounters an individual matching the suspect's description in a public park. The individual states, "I want to go home now," but the officer continues to ask detailed questions about their whereabouts earlier that evening, without first advising them of their Miranda rights. Considering the El Paso Police Department's adherence to Texas law and U.S. constitutional standards, what is the most appropriate course of action for the officer in this situation? Option A. Detain the individual based on the matching description and then provide Miranda warnings. Option B. Immediately cease questioning and provide the individual with their Miranda rights before continuing any further interrogation. Option C. Continue questioning the individual as they are not under arrest and therefore Miranda warnings are not required. Option D. Inform the individual that they are not free to leave and then proceed with questioning. The correct answer is B. Immediately cease questioning and provide the individual with their Miranda rights before continuing any further interrogation. Explanation: the scenario presents a common challenge in law enforcement, balancing the need for information with the rights of individuals and departmental policy. The professional challenge lies in discerning when an individual's voluntary cooperation crosses the line into a situation requiring formal Miranda warnings, particularly when the individual is in custody or their freedom of movement is significantly restricted. El Paso Police Department, EPPD, officers are bound by the Texas Code of Criminal Procedure and established U.S. Supreme Court precedent regarding custodial interrogation. The correct approach involves recognizing that while an individual is not under arrest and has not been formally detained, their statements made during a consensual encounter are generally admissible. However, the moment the encounter escalates to a point where a reasonable person in the individual's position would believe they are not free to leave, and the officer begins to question them in a manner that elicits an incriminating response, Miranda warnings become mandatory. This approach prioritizes adherence to constitutional rights and departmental policy, ensuring that any evidence obtained is legally sound and ethically obtained. The officer's actions in this scenario, by continuing to question the individual after they expressed a desire to leave and before providing Miranda warnings, directly violate the principles established in Miranda v. Arizona and subsequent case law, which protect individuals from self-incrimination when subjected to custodial interrogation. An incorrect approach would be to assume that because the individual was not formally arrested, Miranda warnings are unnecessary, regardless of the coercive nature of the interaction. This fails to acknowledge the subjective element of a reasonable person's perception of freedom. Another incorrect approach would be to proceed with questioning without considering the totality of the circumstances, such as the individual's expressed desire to leave, which signals a potential shift from a consensual encounter to a detention. This disregards the officer's duty to accurately assess the situation and act accordingly to protect individual rights. Finally, an approach that relies solely on the absence of handcuffs or a formal arrest to negate the need for Miranda warnings ignores the broader concept of custody, which can be established by the environment and the officer's conduct. The professional decision-making process in such situations requires officers to continuously assess the nature of their interaction with individuals. They must be acutely aware of the point at which a consensual encounter becomes a detention or arrest. This involves considering factors such as the location, the number of officers present, the demeanor of the officers, the physical restraint of the individual, and any statements made by the individual or the officer that indicate a loss of freedom. When in doubt, officers should err on the side of caution and provide Miranda warnings if they believe a reasonable person would feel they are not free to leave and are being interrogated. Question 6. Research into the El Paso Police Department's EPPD civil service exam reveals a scenario where Officer Rodriguez, responding to a disturbance call at a known residence of individuals with prior minor offenses, observes a situation that appears consistent with the reported disturbance. However, Officer Rodriguez has had several negative personal interactions with one of the residents in the past. Officer Rodriguez proceeds to file a report based on these observations. Considering EPPD commitment to objective reporting and evidence-based investigations, which of the following best describes Officer Rodriguez's professional conduct in documenting the incident? Option A. Officer Rodriguez meticulously documented all observable facts and evidence gathered at the scene, ensuring the report was a factual and unbiased account of the events. Option B. Officer Rodriguez, influenced by past experiences, included speculative statements in the report that were not directly supported by concrete evidence. Option C. Officer Rodriguez omitted certain details from the report that did not strongly support his initial impression of the resident's culpability. Option D. Officer Rodriguez, recalling past negative interactions, focused the report on aspects that seemed to confirm his prior negative impressions of the resident, downplaying other observations. The correct answer is A. Officer Rodriguez meticulously documented all observable facts and evidence gathered at the scene, ensuring the report was a factual and unbiased account of the events. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between departmental policy, the need for thorough investigation, and the potential for personal bias to influence judgment. Officers are entrusted with significant authority, and their actions must be guided by established procedures and ethical standards to maintain public trust and ensure fairness. The requirement for objective evidence gathering and reporting is paramount in upholding the integrity of the El Paso Police Department (EPPD) and the justice system. The correct approach involves meticulously documenting all observations and evidence, regardless of initial impressions or personal feelings about the individuals involved. This adheres to EPPD standard operating procedures for evidence collection and reporting, which mandate factual, unbiased accounts. It also aligns with the ethical obligation of law enforcement officers to act impartially and to base their actions and reports solely on verifiable facts. This approach ensures that any subsequent decisions, whether by supervisors or the courts, are made with complete and accurate information. An incorrect approach would be to rely on assumptions or prior knowledge of the individuals involved to shape the report. This fails to meet the EPPD requirement for objective reporting and introduces the risk of confirmation bias, where an officer might selectively interpret or present information to fit a preconceived notion. Ethically, this is unacceptable as it compromises the integrity of the investigation and can lead to unjust outcomes. Another incorrect approach would be to omit details that do not support a particular narrative or that might reflect negatively on the officer's initial assumptions. This constitutes a failure to provide a complete and truthful account, violating departmental policy and ethical duties. Such omissions can obstruct justice and erode public confidence. Finally, an approach that involves embellishing or fabricating details to strengthen a case is a severe ethical and professional breach. This not only violates EPPD policy, but also constitutes potential criminal misconduct, undermining the entire foundation of law enforcement. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve a conscious effort to set aside personal biases and focus strictly on observable facts and tangible evidence. Officers should ask themselves, what can I prove with objective evidence? And does my report accurately reflect what happened without interpretation or assumption? Adherence to departmental policy, a commitment to truthfulness, and a recognition of the potential impact of their actions on individuals and the community are crucial for sound professional judgment. Question 7. Which approach would be most appropriate for an El Paso Police Department officer to take when a citizen approaches them directly to file a formal complaint alleging excessive force by another EPPD officer during a recent traffic stop in El Paso, Texas? Option A. Immediately document the complaint and refer it to the El Paso Police Department's Internal Affairs Division for a formal investigation. Option B. Advise the citizen that the complaint cannot be pursued without further evidence and dismiss their concerns based on the officer's account. Option C. Engage in an informal discussion with the citizen to understand their concerns and attempt to de-escalate the situation without formal documentation. Option D. Suggest that the citizen and the involved officer attempt to resolve the matter directly through a private conversation. The correct answer is A. Immediately document the complaint and refer it to the El Paso Police Department's Internal Affairs Division for a formal investigation. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for El Paso Police Department (EPPD) officers due to the sensitive nature of citizen complaints and the potential for perceived bias. Maintaining public trust and ensuring fair and impartial investigations are paramount. Officers must navigate the delicate balance between respecting departmental procedures, upholding individual rights, and demonstrating transparency in their actions. The challenge lies in applying the El Paso Police Department's internal affairs policies and relevant Texas state laws regarding citizen complaints and officer conduct in a manner that is both procedurally sound and ethically defensible. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves initiating a formal internal affairs investigation as per EPPD policy and Texas law. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the complaint through established, documented procedures designed for impartiality. The EPPD Internal Affairs Division is specifically tasked with investigating allegations of misconduct, ensuring that all evidence is gathered, witness statements are taken, and a thorough review is conducted. This process aligns with the principles of due process and accountability, mandated by both departmental regulations and Texas statutes governing law enforcement conduct. It provides a structured framework for determining the validity of the complaint and taking appropriate action, thereby upholding public trust and officer integrity. Incorrect approaches analysis. Initiating an informal discussion with the complainant without documenting the interaction or initiating a formal investigation fails to adhere to EPPD-established complaint procedures and Texas law. This approach risks creating the perception of a cover-up or a lack of seriousness in addressing citizen grievances, undermining public confidence, and potentially violating procedural requirements for handling complaints. Directly dismissing the complaint based on the officer's word alone, without any form of investigation or documentation, is a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This bypasses the mandated investigative process, denies the complainant due process, and violates the EPPD duty to thoroughly investigate all allegations of misconduct as required by departmental policy and state law. It demonstrates a lack of accountability and can lead to a breakdown in community relations. Attempting to mediate a resolution between the complainant and the officer without involving the Internal Affairs Division or following established protocols is also an inappropriate approach. While mediation can be a tool in some contexts, it is not a substitute for a formal investigation when allegations of misconduct are made. This approach circumvents the proper channels for accountability and may not adequately address the underlying issues or ensure compliance with departmental standards and legal obligations. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to established policies and legal mandates. When faced with a citizen complaint, the first step is to identify the relevant departmental policies and state laws governing such situations. This involves understanding the procedures for receiving, documenting, and investigating complaints. The professional then assesses the nature of the complaint to determine if it falls within the scope of a formal investigation. The decision-making process should be guided by principles of fairness, impartiality, transparency, and accountability, ensuring that all actions taken are defensible and serve to uphold the integrity of the department and the public trust. Question 8. The control framework reveals that El Paso Police Department Officer Miller has lawfully arrested an individual for suspected felony theft. During the arrest, Officer Miller observed what appeared to be stolen merchandise in plain view within the suspect's vehicle, which is parked on a public street. Officer Miller is aware of the suspect's prior arrests for similar offenses. Considering Texas law and constitutional protection, what is the most appropriate course of action for Officer Miller regarding the vehicle and its contents? Option A. Release the suspect and the vehicle pending further investigation due to the ambiguity of whether the observed items are definitively stolen. Option B. Conduct a cursory search of the vehicle for officer safety, and then allow the suspect to leave with the vehicle if no immediate contraband is found. Option C. Conduct an immediate warrantless search of the vehicle, citing the plain view observation and the suspect's prior criminal history as justification. Option D. Secure the vehicle to prevent tampering or removal and immediately apply for a search warrant based on the plain view observation of suspected stolen merchandise and the probable cause for the arrest. The correct answer is D. Secure the vehicle to prevent tampering or removal and immediately apply for a search warrant based on the plain view observation of suspected stolen merchandise and the probable cause for the arrest. Explanation. The control framework reveals a scenario that is professionally challenging due to the inherent conflict between departmental policy, the need for thorough investigation, and the potential for personal bias to influence decision-making. Officer Miller's awareness of the suspect's prior involvement, while relevant to general policing, must be carefully managed to ensure an objective investigation into the current alleged offense. The requirement for a specific warrant for the search of the vehicle, even with probable cause for an arrest, necessitates adherence to established legal procedures to protect the integrity of evidence and uphold constitutional rights. The approach that represents best professional practice involves securing the vehicle and obtaining a search warrant based on the probable cause established during the lawful arrest. This method is correct because it strictly adheres to the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution, which protects against unreasonable searches and seizures. By obtaining a warrant, Officer Miller ensures that the search is conducted under judicial oversight, validating the probable cause and the scope of the search. This aligns with established Texas law enforcement procedures that emphasize the necessity of warrants for vehicle searches when the exigent circumstances exception does not clearly apply, thereby safeguarding the admissibility of any evidence found. An incorrect approach would be to immediately search the vehicle without a warrant, relying solely on the probable cause for the arrest. This fails to recognize that probable cause for an arrest does not automatically equate to probable cause for a vehicle search under all circumstances, especially when the vehicle is secured and the immediate threat to officers or evidence has been mitigated. Such an action risks violating the suspect's Fourth Amendment rights and could lead to the suppression of crucial evidence in court. Another incorrect approach would be to delay the investigation or release the suspect due to uncertainty about the vehicle search. This is professionally unacceptable as it undermines the department's duty to investigate alleged crimes thoroughly and promptly. While caution is necessary, it should not lead to inaction when probable cause exists for further investigative steps, such as obtaining a warrant. A further incorrect approach would be to use the suspect's prior involvement as justification for a warrantless search. This constitutes a dangerous conflation of past behavior with present probable cause and introduces bias into the investigative process. Prior history can inform an investigation, but cannot substitute for the specific, articulable facts required to establish probable cause for a search of a particular vehicle at a particular time. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of the legal standards for searches and seizures, particularly the nuances of the automobile exception and the warrant requirement. Officers must be trained to differentiate between probable cause for arrest and probable cause for a search, and to assess whether exigent circumstances justify a warrantless search. When in doubt, the safest and most legally sound course of action is to preserve the scene and seek judicial authorization through a warrant. This ensures that investigations are conducted ethically and within the bounds of the law, protecting both public safety and the rights of individuals. Question 9. The control framework reveals that Officer Miller, while on patrol in El Paso, Texas, observed a fellow officer, Officer Davis, place an item into his patrol car that appeared to be a piece of merchandise from a nearby convenience store. Officer Miller recalls Officer Davis mentioning he was short on cash. Officer Miller is aware that the convenience store owner has reported a recent shoplifting incident. Officer Miller needs to decide how to proceed with this observation, considering El Paso Police Department policies and Texas law. Which of the following actions best upholds professional standards and legal obligations? Option A. Discreetly speak with Officer Davis to understand his actions, and if his explanation is satisfactory, consider the matter resolved without further reporting. Option B. Ignore the observation, assuming Officer Davis would not engage in misconduct and that the item was likely purchased legitimately to avoid potential conflict with a colleague. Option C. Report the observation to a supervisor verbally, but omit specific details about the item and the convenience store's recent shoplifting report to avoid escalating the situation unnecessarily. Option D. Document all observations regarding Officer Davis's actions, including the location, time, and description of the item, and submit a detailed report through the appropriate internal channels for review and potential investigation. The correct answer is D. Document all observations regarding Officer Davis's actions, including the location, time, and description of the item, and submit a detailed report through the appropriate internal channels for review and potential investigation. Explanation. The control framework reveals a scenario that is professionally challenging due to the inherent conflict between departmental policy, the need for thorough investigation, and the potential for personal bias or external pressure. Officer Miller's situation requires careful judgment to ensure that the investigation into the alleged theft remains objective and adheres to the El Paso Police Department's established procedures and the Texas Code of Criminal Procedure. The core challenge lies in maintaining the integrity of the investigation while navigating a situation involving a colleague and a potentially sensitive personal relationship. The best professional approach involves meticulously documenting all observations and evidence, regardless of their perceived significance, and submitting them through the proper channels for an impartial review. This approach prioritizes adherence to departmental policy and the principles of due process. By following established protocols for evidence handling and reporting, Officer Miller ensures that the investigation is conducted without undue influence and that all findings are presented objectively to the appropriate authorities for a fair determination. This aligns with the EPPD commitment to lawful and ethical policing, as well as the Texas Code of Criminal Procedure's emphasis on fair and impartial investigations. An approach that involves withholding certain pieces of information deemed less critical or potentially embarrassing to the colleague is professionally unacceptable. This constitutes a failure to uphold the duty to report all relevant findings and can be construed as obstruction of justice or a violation of departmental integrity policies. Such an action undermines the investigative process and erodes public trust. Another professionally unacceptable approach would be to confront the colleague directly and attempt to resolve the matter informally without involving the proper investigative channels. While well-intentioned, this bypasses established procedures designed to ensure fairness and thoroughness. It risks compromising the investigation, creating a perception of favoritism, and failing to adhere to the mandated reporting requirements outlined in departmental regulations. Finally, an approach that relies solely on personal judgment to dismiss the allegations without a formal investigation is also professionally flawed. This demonstrates a disregard for departmental policy and the legal framework governing theft investigations. It fails to provide the accused with due process and neglects the responsibility to thoroughly investigate all reported incidents, regardless of the perceived credibility of the initial report. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of departmental policies and relevant state laws. When faced with a conflict of interest or a situation that could compromise objectivity, officers should err on the side of transparency and adherence to protocol. This includes thorough documentation, impartial reporting, and seeking guidance from supervisors or internal affairs when necessary to ensure the integrity of their actions and the investigative process. Question 10. The control framework reveals that Sergeant Miller of the El Paso Police Department is tasked with calculating the overtime pay for a team of 5 officers who worked on a special detail in El Paso, Texas, last month. The detail required 120 total overtime hours to be distributed among the 5 officers. Officer A worked 30 overtime hours, Officer B worked 25 overtime hours, Officer C worked 20 overtime hours, Officer D worked 25 overtime hours, and Officer E worked 20 overtime hours. The standard hourly rate for these officers is $25.00 per hour. EPPD policy dictates that overtime hours are paid at 1.5 times the standard hourly rate. What is the total overtime pay for the team? Option A, $3,000,000. Option B, $3,750,000. Option C, $4,500,000. Option D, $4,000,000. The correct answer is C, $4,500,000. Explanation. The control framework reveals a scenario involving the El Paso Police Department, EPPD, and the critical need for accurate financial record-keeping, particularly concerning overtime expenditures. This situation is professionally challenging because it demands not only mathematical precision, but also strict adherence to departmental policies and potentially state regulations governing public employee compensation and financial reporting. Mismanagement or miscalculation of overtime can lead to significant financial discrepancies, audit failures, and erosion of public trust. The core of the challenge lies in balancing operational needs with fiscal responsibility and transparent accounting. The correct approach involves a meticulous calculation of overtime hours based on the established departmental policy, and then applying the correct overtime pay rate. This method ensures that all overtime is accounted for accurately, reflecting the actual hours worked and the legally mandated or policy-defined pay rate. For the El Paso Police Department, this would align with Texas state law regarding public employee overtime and any specific EPPD standard operating procedures, SOP, that detail overtime calculation and approval. Adhering to these specific policies and legal frameworks is paramount for maintaining fiscal integrity and compliance. An incorrect approach would be to simply average the overtime hours across all officers in the unit without considering individual work records. This fails to acknowledge the principle of paying for actual hours worked and could lead to underpayment or overpayment, both of which are problematic. Underpayment is a violation of wage laws and departmental policy, while overpayment represents a misuse of public funds. Another incorrect approach would be to apply a flat overtime rate without considering any potential multipliers or differentials that might be stipulated in collective bargaining agreements or departmental policy for specific circumstances, e.g., holiday overtime. This ignores the nuances of compensation structures and can lead to inaccurate financial reporting and potential grievances. Finally, an approach that relies on estimations or rounded figures rather than precise calculations is fundamentally flawed. Public funds require exact accounting, and estimations can mask errors and make auditing difficult, potentially violating principles of accountability and transparency expected of law enforcement agencies. Professionals should employ a decision-making process that prioritizes accuracy, policy adherence, and legal compliance. This involves 1. Clearly understanding the relevant policies and laws governing overtime. 2. Gathering precise data on hours worked. 3. Applying the correct calculation methodology as defined by policy and law. 4. Documenting all calculations and approvals thoroughly. 5. Seeking clarification from supervisors or finance departments when any ambiguity arises. Question 11. Risk assessment procedures indicate a potential connection between a recent burglary in El Paso, Texas, and a known associate of the victim. Officer Miller, responding to the scene, observes the associate loitering nearby and believes they may possess information or evidence related to the crime. What is the most appropriate course of action for Officer Miller to take, considering El Paso Police Department, EPPD, protocols and Texas law? Option A. Question the associate extensively about their whereabouts and activities during the time of the burglary, without informing them of their right to remain silent, as they are not yet formally a suspect. Option B. Approach the associate, identify himself as a police officer, and politely request to speak with them, explaining the reason for the inquiry and respecting their right to decline further interaction if they are not a suspect. Option C. Seize the associate's mobile phone without a warrant, believing it may contain digital evidence of the crime, and inform them they are required to cooperate. Option D. Immediately detain the associate and search their person and any visible belongings for evidence related to the burglary, based on the suspicion of their association with the victim. The correct answer is B. Approach the associate, identify himself as a police officer, and politely request to speak with them, explaining the reason for the inquiry and respecting their right to decline further interaction if they are not a suspect. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an officer to balance the immediate need for information with the established legal and ethical protocols for handling evidence and witness statements. The pressure to solve a crime quickly can lead to shortcuts that compromise the integrity of the investigation and potentially violate the rights of individuals involved. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all actions are legally sound and ethically defensible, upholding the public trust. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves meticulously documenting all observations and interactions, and ensuring that any evidence is collected and processed according to established El Paso Police Department, EPPD, procedures and Texas state law. This includes obtaining consent or a warrant for searches, properly logging all evidence, and conducting interviews in a manner that respects the rights of the individual, such as informing them of their rights if they are considered a suspect. This approach is correct because it adheres to the Texas Code of Criminal Procedure and the EPPD Standard Operating Procedures, which are designed to protect individual liberties and ensure the admissibility of evidence in court. It prioritizes due process and the integrity of the investigation. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately seizing personal electronic devices without a warrant or clear consent, based solely on suspicion. This violates the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and Texas privacy laws, which protect against unreasonable searches and seizures. Such an action could lead to the suppression of crucial evidence and disciplinary action against the officer. Another incorrect approach is to conduct a lengthy, informal interrogation of a potential witness without advising them of their rights, especially if there is probable cause to believe they are involved in the crime. This could be construed as an unlawful detention or interrogation, potentially violating their rights and rendering any statements inadmissible. It also fails to follow EPPD guidelines for interviewing individuals who may be suspects. A third incorrect approach is to rely solely on hearsay or uncorroborated statements from a single, unverified source to justify immediate action, such as an arrest or a search, without conducting independent verification or gathering further evidence. This deviates from the EPPD requirement for probable cause, which must be based on reliable information and facts, not mere speculation or rumor, and could lead to wrongful arrest or improper evidence collection. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to legal statutes and departmental policies. This involves a thorough understanding of probable cause, search and seizure laws, and interview protocols. When faced with uncertainty, officers should consult with supervisors or legal advisors to ensure their actions are appropriate and legally sound. The goal is always to gather evidence effectively, while upholding the rights of all individuals involved and maintaining the integrity of the justice system. Question 12. Cost-benefit analysis shows that the El Paso Police Department (EPPD) has limited resources for patrol deployment in El Paso, considering the department's mandate to ensure public safety and respond to community needs. Which of the following strategies would best optimize resource allocation for effective crime prevention and response within the legal framework of Texas? Option A. Develop targeted patrol strategies by analyzing crime data to identify high-risk areas and times, while simultaneously incorporating community feedback gathered through engagement programs to address specific neighborhood concerns. Option B. Primarily focus patrol deployment on areas with the highest volume of incoming calls for service, regardless of the nature of the calls or underlying crime trends. Option C. Rely predominantly on the individual discretion of patrol officers to decide where and when to patrol, based on their immediate observations and personal experience, with minimal reliance on data analysis or strategic planning. Option D. Allocate the majority of patrol resources to neighborhoods that have historically experienced the highest rates of property crime, without considering other crime categories or community input. The correct answer is A. Develop targeted patrol strategies by analyzing crime data to identify high-risk areas and times, while simultaneously incorporating community feedback gathered through engagement programs to address specific neighborhood concerns. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge for law enforcement agencies, balancing resource allocation with community needs and departmental priorities. The El Paso Police Department (EPPD) operates within a specific budgetary and operational framework governed by Texas state law and local ordinances. The challenge lies in making a decision that is both fiscally responsible and strategically effective in addressing crime and public safety concerns within El Paso. A purely reactive approach, while addressing immediate calls, can lead to inefficient resource deployment and neglect of proactive crime prevention. Conversely, an overly rigid, data-driven approach without considering community impact or officer well-being can also be detrimental. The best approach requires a nuanced understanding of data, community feedback, and strategic planning, all within the legal and ethical bounds of law enforcement in Texas. The most effective approach involves a comprehensive, data-informed strategy that integrates community feedback and proactive policing initiatives. This approach recognizes that crime patterns are not static and that effective policing requires adaptability. By analyzing crime data to identify high-risk areas and times, and simultaneously soliciting input from El Paso residents through community engagement programs, the EPPD can develop targeted patrol strategies. This allows for the efficient deployment of officers to areas where they are most needed, both for immediate response and for proactive crime deterrence. This aligns with the principles of community-oriented policing and evidence-based policing, which are encouraged within the Texas law enforcement framework to maximize public safety and build trust. An approach that solely focuses on responding to the highest volume of calls without considering the nature of those calls or underlying crime trends is problematic. This reactive strategy can lead to officers being constantly engaged in low-priority calls, diverting resources from more serious offenses and proactive crime prevention efforts. It fails to address the root causes of crime and can lead to a perception of ineffective policing if crime rates do not decrease. Another ineffective approach is to prioritize only areas with the highest reported property crimes ignoring other crime categories or community concerns. This narrow focus can lead to a disproportionate allocation of resources, potentially neglecting violent crime hotspots or areas experiencing significant quality of life issues that impact community well-being. It also fails to acknowledge that crime is multifaceted and requires a holistic response. Finally, an approach that relies solely on officer discretion without any data analysis or strategic oversight is also professionally unsound. While officer experience is valuable, a complete lack of data-driven decision-making can lead to inconsistent resource allocation, missed opportunities for crime prevention, and potential biases in patrol patterns. This approach lacks accountability and strategic direction, which are essential for effective public service. Professionals should employ a decision-making process that begins with understanding the problem context, including available data and community needs. They should then identify potential solutions, evaluating each against established principles of effective policing, legal requirements, and ethical considerations. This involves seeking input from stakeholders, considering the long-term implications of decisions, and being prepared to adapt strategies based on ongoing evaluation and feedback. Question 13. Strategic planning requires the El Paso Police Department, EPPD, to consider how to best allocate its limited resources to address evolving public safety challenges within El Paso, Texas. Given a recent increase in property crimes in specific neighborhoods and a concurrent rise in calls for service related to community outreach programs, what is the most effective strategic approach for the EPPD to consider when developing its next operational plan? Option A. Prioritize expanding community outreach programs and reassigning officers to facilitate these initiatives, even if it means reducing immediate response capabilities for certain types of calls. Option B. Immediately reallocate a significant portion of patrol officers from less crime-affected areas to focus exclusively on the neighborhoods experiencing a surge in property crimes. Option C. Implement changes based on recent media reports highlighting specific crime trends and direct community feedback received through social media channels, without extensive data analysis. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive needs assessment to identify critical public safety functions, evaluate current staffing against crime data and community demands, and develop a phased plan for resource allocation that aligns with strategic objectives. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive needs assessment to identify critical public safety functions, evaluate current staffing against crime data and community demands, and develop a phased plan for resource allocation that aligns with strategic objectives. Explanation. Strategic planning requires careful consideration of resource allocation, community engagement, and operational efficiency to ensure the El Paso Police Department, EPPD, effectively serves the citizens of El Paso, Texas. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing immediate operational needs with long-term strategic goals, while also navigating potential public perception and interdepartmental collaboration. The decision-making process must be grounded in the principles of effective public service and adherence to departmental policies and Texas law. The best approach involves a comprehensive needs assessment that prioritizes critical public safety functions and aligns with the EPPD's strategic objectives. This includes evaluating current staffing levels against crime statistics and community demands, identifying areas where additional resources would have the most significant impact on crime reduction and public trust, and developing a phased implementation plan for any proposed changes. This approach is correct because it is data-driven, aligns with the department's mission, and allows for responsible allocation of limited resources, ensuring that the EPPD can meet its core responsibilities while also pursuing strategic improvements. This aligns with the general principles of public administration and law enforcement management, emphasizing evidence-based decision-making and strategic alignment with community needs. An approach that focuses solely on reallocating existing personnel to address a single high-profile crime trend without a broader assessment of departmental needs is professionally unacceptable. This is because it risks neglecting other critical public safety areas, potentially leading to increased crime in other sectors and undermining the department's overall effectiveness. It also fails to consider the long-term implications of such a narrow focus and may not be sustainable. Another professionally unacceptable approach would be to prioritize community requests for non-enforcement services over core policing functions without a clear strategic justification. While community engagement is vital, neglecting essential law enforcement duties in favor of less critical services can compromise public safety and erode public confidence in the department's primary mission. This approach fails to recognize the fundamental role of the EPPD in maintaining order and preventing crime. Finally, an approach that involves implementing significant changes based on anecdotal evidence or political pressure, without rigorous data analysis or strategic planning, is also professionally unsound. This can lead to inefficient resource allocation, unintended negative consequences, and a lack of accountability. Effective public service demands a systematic and evidence-based approach to decision-making. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with clearly defining the problem or opportunity, gathering relevant data and information, identifying and evaluating potential solutions based on their alignment with strategic goals and available resources, and then implementing and monitoring the chosen course of action. This process should involve consultation with relevant stakeholders and adherence to established policies and legal frameworks. Question 14. Quality control measures reveal that an El Paso Police Department EPPD officer, while on duty and accessing departmental databases for an unrelated investigation, appears to be conducting searches that are not pertinent to their assigned tasks and may be related to personal acquaintances. What is the most appropriate and professionally responsible course of action for a fellow EPPD officer who witnesses this behavior? Option A. Report the observed behavior to the EPPD Internal Affairs Division or a direct supervisor for investigation. Option B. Approach the officer directly and discuss the observed searches, questioning their relevance. Option C. Ignore the behavior, assuming it is a minor infraction or a misunderstanding. Option D. Discuss the observation with other officers informally to gauge their opinions before taking any action. The correct answer is A. Report the observed behavior to the EPPD Internal Affairs Division or a direct supervisor for investigation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge involving the potential misuse of information obtained during official duties. Officers of the El Paso Police Department, EPPD, are entrusted with sensitive data, and maintaining public trust requires strict adherence to ethical guidelines and departmental policies regarding its use. The challenge lies in distinguishing between legitimate information sharing for public safety and inappropriate personal gain or dissemination. Careful judgment is required to uphold the integrity of the department and protect individual privacy. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves reporting the observed suspicious activity to the appropriate Internal Affairs Division or supervisor for investigation. This approach is correct because it adheres to established EPPD policies and Texas state law concerning the proper handling of law enforcement information and the reporting of potential misconduct. By initiating a formal review process, the department can ensure that any alleged violations are investigated thoroughly and impartially, protecting both the public and the officers involved. This aligns with the ethical imperative to maintain accountability and transparency within the department. Incorrect approach is analysis. Disregarding the observation and taking no action is professionally unacceptable because it constitutes a failure to uphold the duty to report potential misconduct. This inaction could allow for continued or escalated misuse of information, eroding public trust, and potentially violating departmental regulations and state laws. Confronting the officer directly and discussing the observed behavior without involving supervisors or internal affairs is also professionally unacceptable. While seemingly proactive, this approach bypasses established reporting channels, could lead to an unprofessional or confrontational interaction, and fails to initiate a formal, documented investigation that is necessary for proper disciplinary or corrective action. It also risks misinterpreting the situation or creating further complications without proper oversight. Sharing the observation with other officers outside of official channels, even for the purpose of seeking advice, is professionally unacceptable. This constitutes gossip or the unauthorized dissemination of information related to potential internal matters. It can create a negative work environment, undermine the chain of command, and potentially prejudice any future investigation. Information regarding potential misconduct should only be shared through designated reporting mechanisms. Professional reasoning. Professionals in law enforcement should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to departmental policy, ethical conduct, and legal requirements. When observing potential misconduct, The primary steps should be: 1. Document the observation factually and objectively. 2. Consult departmental policy and procedures regarding reporting such observations. 3. Report the observation through the designated chain of command or internal affairs division. 4. Cooperate fully with any subsequent investigation. This structured approach ensures that all concerns are addressed appropriately, maintaining fairness, accountability, and the integrity of the law enforcement agency. Question 15. Benchmark analysis indicates that an El Paso Police Department officer, while conducting a lawful traffic stop in El Paso, Texas, observes a firearm partially visible on the passenger seat of the vehicle. The officer safely secures the firearm and places it in a temporary evidence bag within their patrol vehicle. The officer then proceeds to complete the traffic stop and intends to book the firearm into evidence later in their shift. What is the most appropriate course of action for the officer regarding the secured firearm? Option A. Make a mental note of the firearm's discovery and location, assuming the details will be remembered accurately for later documentation, and focus on completing the traffic stop before addressing the evidence. Option B. Hand the secured firearm to a fellow officer who is en route to the scene, instructing them to take it directly to the evidence locker, as the officer needs to complete other aspects of the traffic stop. Option C. Immediately and thoroughly document the discovery, location, and condition of the firearm, along with the details of its transfer to the patrol vehicle, and then proceed to the nearest EPPD evidence processing unit to formally book the item as soon as practicable. Option D. Place the secured firearm in the trunk of the patrol vehicle to ensure it is out of sight, and then continue with the traffic stop, planning to retrieve it for booking at the end of the shift. The correct answer is C. Immediately and thoroughly document the discovery, location, and condition of the firearm, along with the details of its transfer to the patrol vehicle, and then proceed to the nearest EPPD evidence processing unit to formally book the item as soon as practicable. Explanation. Benchmark analysis indicates that the El Paso Police Department, EPPD, operates within a specific Texas state and federal legal framework governing law enforcement conduct and evidence handling. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the potential for a procedural error to compromise an investigation and lead to the exclusion of crucial evidence. The officer's immediate actions must balance the urgency of securing evidence with the strict adherence to established protocols to maintain the integrity of the case. The correct approach involves meticulously documenting the chain of custody for the recovered firearm, including the exact time and location of discovery, the condition of the item, and the identity of all individuals who handled it. This aligns with Texas Code of Criminal Procedure Article 38:23, which mandates that evidence obtained in violation of the Constitution or laws of Texas or the United States shall not be admitted against the defendant. Proper chain of custody procedures are fundamental to demonstrating that the evidence was not tampered with, altered, or contaminated, thereby ensuring its admissibility in court. This meticulous documentation is a cornerstone of due process and the right to a fair trial. An incorrect approach would be to immediately hand the firearm to a colleague, without any personal documentation of its discovery and transfer. This failure to establish a clear and unbroken chain of custody directly violates the principles of evidence handling and could lead to the evidence being deemed inadmissible under Article 38:23. It also creates an ethical lapse by not taking personal responsibility for the integrity of the evidence. Another incorrect approach would be to store the firearm in an unsecured location within the patrol vehicle temporarily. This action poses a significant risk of contamination, tampering, or loss, and directly contravenes established departmental policies and best practices for evidence security, which are designed to prevent such occurrences and maintain evidentiary integrity. A further incorrect approach would be to delay the formal booking and logging of the firearm into evidence until the end of the shift, assuming it is a minor detail. This delay introduces unnecessary risk and potential for loss of memory regarding critical details of the discovery and transfer, thereby weakening the chain of custody and potentially jeopardizing the admissibility of the evidence. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of departmental policy and relevant legal statutes regarding evidence handling. Officers must prioritize meticulous documentation at every step of evidence recovery and transfer. When in doubt, consulting with a supervisor or evidence custodian is always the prudent course of action to ensure compliance and maintain the integrity of the investigation. Question 16. Governance review demonstrates a pattern of incomplete chain of custody documentation for seized narcotics within the El Paso Police Department (EPPD. Considering the legal ramifications of improperly handled evidence under Texas law and federal standards, what is the most effective and ethically sound course of action for the EPPD command staff to address this recurring issue? Option A. Implement mandatory, comprehensive retraining for all officers involved in evidence handling, with a specific focus on the detailed requirements of chain of custody documentation for narcotics, incorporating practical exercises, and a review of past procedural errors. Option B. Assign supervisors to conduct a more rigorous review of all evidence logs, focusing on identifying and correcting errors before evidence is submitted to the prosecutor's office. Option C. Establish a disciplinary matrix for officers found to have incomplete chain of custody records, with immediate consequences for any identified deficiencies. Option D. Issue a departmental-wide memorandum reiterating the existing policy on evidence handling and chain of custody, emphasizing the importance of accurate documentation. The correct answer is A. Implement mandatory, comprehensive retraining for all officers involved in evidence handling, with a specific focus on the detailed requirements of chain of custody documentation for narcotics, incorporating practical exercises, and a review of past procedural errors. Explanation. Governance review demonstrates a recurring issue within the El Paso Police Department (EPPD) concerning the proper handling of evidence, specifically the chain of custody documentation for seized narcotics. This scenario is professionally challenging because a lapse in chain of custody can lead to the suppression of crucial evidence in criminal proceedings, potentially jeopardizing convictions and undermining public trust in law enforcement's integrity. The EPPD operates under Texas state law and federal guidelines applicable to law enforcement agencies. Careful judgment is required to ensure all officers understand and adhere to these protocols. The best approach involves immediate and comprehensive retraining for all officers involved in evidence handling, focusing specifically on the detailed requirements of Texas Code of Criminal Procedure Article 38, 23, and relevant FBI evidence handling guidelines. This retraining should include practical exercises and a review of past cases where chain of custody was compromised. The justification for this approach lies in its proactive and systemic nature. By addressing the root cause, a lack of understanding or consistent application of procedures, it aims to prevent future errors and reinforce the legal integrity of evidence. This aligns with the EPPD duty to uphold the law and ensure that evidence is admissible in court, thereby supporting the judicial process. An incorrect approach would be to simply issue a memo reminding officers of the existing policy. This fails to address the underlying issue of potential misunderstanding or lack of training, making it unlikely to affect lasting change. It also neglects the opportunity to reinforce the critical importance of the chain of custody in a tangible way. Another incorrect approach would be to implement a punitive system where officers are disciplined for every minor infraction without prior retraining. While accountability is important, a purely punitive approach without an educational component can foster fear and resentment, potentially leading to officers avoiding proper documentation altogether rather than risking error, which is detrimental to effective law enforcement. Finally, an approach that involves only supervisors reviewing evidence logs without direct officer retraining is insufficient. While supervisory oversight is necessary, it does not equip the officers directly responsible for handling evidence with the knowledge and skills needed to prevent errors in the first place. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes education and systemic improvement when addressing recurring procedural failures. This involves identifying the problem, assessing its root cause, e.g., training gap, unclear policy, developing targeted solutions, e.g., retraining, policy clarification, implementing the solution, and then monitoring its effectiveness. This iterative process ensures that issues are addressed comprehensively and sustainably. Question 17. The control framework reveals that El Paso Police Department Officer Miller observes a prominent local business owner committing a clear violation of the Texas Transportation Code while driving. The business owner, known to have significant influence within the city, briefly acknowledges Officer Miller with a wave. Officer Miller is aware of the business owner's connections and the potential for negative attention if a citation is issued. Considering the El Paso Police Department's commitment to impartial enforcement and adherence to Texas law, what is the most appropriate course of action for Officer Miller? Option A. Issue a verbal warning to the business owner without any official documentation of the incident. Option B. Issue a citation to the business owner in accordance with the Texas Transportation Code and EPPD policy, documenting the violation. Option C. Overlook the violation due to the business owner's local influence and potential for political repercussions. Option D. Delay issuing any citation and seek immediate guidance from a supervisor regarding how to handle the situation due to the individual's prominence. The correct answer is B. Issue a citation to the business owner in accordance with the Texas Transportation Code and EPPD policy, documenting the violation. Explanation. The control framework reveals a scenario that is professionally challenging due to the inherent conflict between departmental policy, potential public perception, and the officer's duty to uphold the law impartially. Officer Miller faces a situation where a minor infraction, committed by a well-connected individual, could lead to significant political fallout if handled strictly, yet ignoring it would violate departmental procedures and the principle of equal application of the law. Careful judgment is required to balance these competing pressures while maintaining public trust and adherence to the El Paso Police Department's EPPD established policies and the Texas Transportation Code. The best professional approach involves documenting the observed violation accurately and issuing a citation in accordance with Texas law and EPPD policy. This approach is correct because it upholds the principle of equal justice under the law, ensuring that all individuals, regardless of their connections, are subject to the same legal standards. Specifically, Texas Transportation Code Section 542(201) allows for the issuance of citations for traffic violations. EPPD policy, like most law enforcement agencies, mandates the enforcement of traffic laws. By issuing a citation, Officer Miller acts within the bounds of his authority and duty, creating an objective record of the event and its resolution. This also protects the officer from accusations of favoritism or dereliction of duty. An approach that involves overlooking the violation due to the individual's influence is professionally unacceptable. This constitutes a failure to uphold the law and departmental policy, creating an ethical breach by showing preferential treatment. It undermines the integrity of the EPPD and erodes public trust, as citizens may perceive that influence can shield individuals from accountability. This action could also lead to disciplinary action against Officer Miller for failing to perform his duties. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to issue a verbal warning without any documentation. While seemingly lenient, this still fails to adhere to the requirement of enforcing traffic laws and creates no official record of the incident. This can lead to inconsistencies in enforcement and may be perceived as a way to avoid issuing a formal citation without proper justification, potentially opening the door to accusations of favoritism or a lack of diligence. Finally, an approach that involves delaying the decision or seeking advice from a supervisor without immediate action on the observed violation is also problematic. While seeking guidance can be appropriate in complex situations, the observed violation appears straightforward. Delaying action without a clear, justifiable reason can be interpreted as an attempt to avoid making a decision or to curry favor, and it still leaves the initial infraction unaddressed in a timely manner. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of applicable laws and departmental policies. Officers should assess the situation objectively, identify the specific violation, and then apply the relevant legal and policy requirements consistently. If there is genuine ambiguity or a need for specialized guidance, seeking that advice promptly is appropriate, but the initial response should be grounded in established procedures. The focus must always be on impartial enforcement and maintaining the integrity of the law enforcement agency. Question 18. The control framework reveals that El Paso Police Department EPPD Officer Miller is assigned to investigate a series of minor property crimes. During the initial stages of the investigation, Officer Miller realizes that one of the individuals identified as a person of interest has a casual acquaintance from a local community group. Officer Miller has known this individual for approximately 2 years, attending occasional meetings and social events, but they are not close friends. The investigation requires interviewing this person of interest. What is the most appropriate course of action for Officer Miller to take? Option A. Continue the investigation without mentioning the acquaintance, assuming the personal relationship will not affect their professional judgment. Option B. Immediately inform their supervisor of the acquaintance and request to be recused from any part of the investigation involving this individual. Option C. Proceed with the interview, making a conscious effort to remain objective and unbiased during the questioning. Option D. Discreetly contact the acquaintance outside of official channels to gauge their involvement before conducting the formal interview. Correct answer is B. Immediately inform their supervisor of the acquaintance and request to be recused from any part of the investigation involving this individual. Explanation. The control framework reveals a scenario that is professionally challenging due to the inherent conflict between departmental policy, the need for thorough investigation, and the potential for personal bias to influence actions. Officer Miller's situation requires careful judgment to uphold the integrity of the El Paso Police Department (EPPD) and ensure fair treatment for all individuals involved in investigations. The core challenge lies in maintaining objectivity when personal relationships intersect with official duties. The best approach involves a strict adherence to established departmental procedures for handling potential conflicts of interest. This means immediately disclosing the personal relationship to a supervisor and recusing oneself from any aspect of the investigation involving the acquaintance. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the conflict of interest by removing the officer from a position where their impartiality could be compromised. Texas law and EPPD policy mandate that officers avoid situations that could create even the appearance of impropriety or bias. By disclosing and recusing, Officer Miller upholds the ethical standards of the department and ensures the investigation proceeds without undue influence, thereby protecting the integrity of the judicial process and public trust. An approach that involves proceeding with the investigation but attempting to remain impartial is professionally unacceptable. While the intention might be to conduct a fair investigation, the mere existence of a personal relationship creates a significant risk of unconscious bias. This failure to disclose and recuse violates EPPD policy and the ethical obligation to avoid conflicts of interest, potentially leading to a compromised investigation and legal challenges to its findings. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to ignore the personal relationship and continue the investigation as if it did not exist. This demonstrates a disregard for departmental policy and ethical guidelines. It not only risks actual bias, but also creates a perception of favoritism or unfairness, eroding public trust in the EPPD. Such an action could have serious repercussions for the investigation's validity and the officer's career. Finally, an approach that involves discussing the case with the acquaintance outside of official channels, even with the intention of gathering information, is also professionally unacceptable. This constitutes a breach of investigative protocol and confidentiality. It further exacerbates the conflict of interest and could be construed as an attempt to influence the investigation or compromise the integrity of the evidence. The professional reasoning process for officers in similar situations should involve a proactive assessment of potential conflicts. When a personal relationship might intersect with official duties, the immediate step should be to consult departmental policy on conflicts of interest and disclosure. If a conflict is identified, the officer must err on the side of caution and disclose the situation to their supervisor, requesting to be removed from the matter. This ensures transparency, maintains departmental integrity, and upholds the public's trust in law enforcement. Question 19. The control framework reveals that El Paso Police Department (EPPD) Officer Miller is assigned to investigate a minor traffic accident. During the course of the investigation, Officer Miller realizes that one of the key witnesses is a close personal friend from his neighborhood. Considering EPPD established policies on ethical conduct and conflict of interest, what is the most appropriate course of action for Officer Miller? Option A. Determine that the personal relationship is not significant enough to impact the investigation and proceed with the interview without any disclosure. Option B. Proceed with interviewing the witness, making a conscious effort to remain objective and unbiased during the questioning. Option C. Conduct the interview as planned and then, after gathering the witness's statement, disclose the personal relationship to his supervisor. Option D. Immediately inform his supervisor of the personal relationship with the witness and request to be recused from further involvement in the investigation. The correct answer is D. Immediately inform his supervisor of the personal relationship with the witness and request to be recused from further involvement in the investigation. Explanation. The control framework reveals a scenario that is professionally challenging due to the inherent conflict between departmental policy, the need for thorough investigation, and the potential for personal bias to influence decision-making. Officer Miller's close personal relationship with the witness creates a significant ethical dilemma, requiring careful judgment to ensure the integrity of the investigation and maintain public trust in the El Paso Police Department. EPPD. The paramount concern is to uphold the EPPD commitment to impartiality and due process. The best approach involves immediate disclosure of the personal relationship to the supervisor and recusal from any investigative duties related to the case. This aligns with fundamental principles of law enforcement ethics and EPPD policy, which mandate avoiding conflicts of interest and maintaining objectivity. By informing the supervisor, Officer Miller ensures that the department is aware of the potential bias and can assign the investigation to an officer without such a connection, thereby safeguarding the investigation's credibility and preventing any appearance of impropriety. This proactive step upholds the EPPD duty to conduct fair and unbiased investigations, as expected by the citizens of El Paso. An approach that involves proceeding with the interview while attempting to remain objective fails to adequately address the appearance of bias and the inherent difficulty in compartmentalizing personal relationships during an official capacity. This could lead to the witness feeling pressured or, conversely, providing information they believe the officer wants to hear, compromising the accuracy of their statement. This approach violates the EPPD ethical obligation to avoid even the appearance of impropriety. Another unacceptable approach is to conduct the interview and then, after the fact, disclose the relationship to the supervisor. This is problematic because the information gathered may already be tainted, and the disclosure comes too late to prevent potential prejudice to the investigation. It suggests a lack of understanding of the importance of preemptive conflict management and could undermine the reliability of the evidence collected. Finally, an approach where Officer Miller decides the relationship is not significant enough to warrant disclosure and proceeds with the interview without informing anyone is a serious ethical and professional failing. This demonstrates a disregard for departmental policy on conflicts of interest and a failure to recognize the impact of personal connections on investigative impartiality. It erodes public trust and could lead to the evidence being deemed inadmissible, jeopardizing the case. Professionals in law enforcement should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency, adherence to policy, and the avoidance of conflicts of interest. When a potential conflict arises, the immediate step should be to identify the conflict, assess its potential impact on the investigation, and proactively disclose it to the appropriate authority, e.g., supervisor, to ensure impartiality and maintain the integrity of the process. Question 20. The control framework reveals that the El Paso Police Department, EPPD, is experiencing a significant increase in overtime expenditures across several divisions. Sergeant Rodriguez, responsible for managing overtime within the patrol division, notices that the division is on track to exceed its allocated overtime budget by 15% by the end of the fiscal quarter. He is aware that the current operational tempo requires a certain level of overtime to maintain adequate staffing levels for calls for service. If the patrol division's allocated overtime budget for the quarter is $150,000, and they have already incurred $130,000 in overtime expenses with 6 weeks remaining in the quarter. What is the maximum additional overtime expenditure the division can incur without exceeding its budget by more than the projected 15%? Option A, $45,000. Option B, $15,000. Option C, $35,000. Option D, $20,000. Correct answer is A, $45,000. Explanation. The control framework reveals a scenario involving the El Paso Police Department, EPPD, and the management of overtime expenditures, which is a critical aspect of departmental budgeting and resource allocation. This situation is professionally challenging because it requires balancing operational needs, officer compensation, and adherence to strict budgetary constraints. Mismanagement of overtime can lead to significant financial strain, potential audit findings, and erosion of public trust in the department's fiscal responsibility. Careful judgment is required to ensure that overtime is utilized effectively and ethically, aligning with departmental policies and the principles of sound public administration. The approach that represents best professional practice involves a proactive and data-driven method for overtime management. This entails establishing clear, pre-approved overtime thresholds for each division, regularly monitoring overtime accrual against these thresholds, and implementing a tiered approval process that escalates for any overtime approaching or exceeding the established limits. This method is correct because it aligns with the principles of fiscal accountability and responsible budgeting, which are paramount in public service. Specifically, it adheres to the implied regulatory framework governing municipal budgeting and expenditure in Texas, which mandates that departments operate within allocated funds and demonstrate prudent financial management. By proactively identifying and addressing potential overspending, this approach prevents budget overruns and ensures that overtime is used strategically to meet genuine operational demands, rather than becoming an uncontrolled expenditure. An incorrect approach involves approving overtime requests solely based on immediate operational needs without considering the cumulative impact on the division's budget. This is professionally unacceptable because it disregards the fundamental principle of budgetary control. Such an approach can lead to significant overspending, potentially requiring emergency budget reallocations or cuts in other essential services, and may violate Texas local government code provisions related to fiscal management and expenditure limits. Another incorrect approach is to retroactively approve overtime after it has been incurred, without any prior authorization or budgetary consideration. This is professionally unacceptable, as it undermines any semblance of financial planning and control. It creates a situation where expenditures are made without prior commitment of funds, which is a direct contravention of sound financial practices and likely violates Texas statutes requiring proper authorization for all public expenditures. A further incorrect approach is to consistently deny overtime requests, even when critical operational needs exist, due to a rigid adherence to a preset, inflexible budget. While fiscal prudence is important, this approach can lead to understaffing during critical periods, compromising public safety and officer well-being. This is professionally unacceptable as it fails to balance budgetary constraints with the core mission of the police department, potentially leading to operational failures and increased risks. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a cyclical approach. First, understanding the operational demands and the necessity of overtime. Second, establishing clear, realistic, and approved budgetary limits for overtime within each division. Third, implementing a robust system for real-time monitoring of overtime accrual. Fourth, developing a clear escalation protocol for overtime that exceeds or approaches limits, involving supervisory and budgetary review. And fifth, conducting regular post-expenditure analysis to identify trends and inform future budgeting and policy adjustments. This systematic process ensures that overtime is managed effectively, ethically, and in compliance with all applicable financial regulations.